Oh, there's my camera. Hi, I'm Gaio, the chivalrous chauvinist. Welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast. Sucias are my favorite. Today's episode, I have a guest today with me. Her name is Felicity Azura. She is a professional cuddler and a writer on Substack. Felicity, thanks for coming on to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you are very well spoken and articulate in your
Oh, thank you.
Substack writings, and it made me open up my eyes to a lot of different perspectives as far as what sex workers have to go through. And I didn't consider or realize that professional cuddlers are categorized as sex work, even though there's no sex involved usually, or as far as I understand, there isn't. And so, would you mind explaining to my listeners what a professional cuddler does and how does that, fall inside the sex work world?
So, professional cuddling is very often regarded as a form of therapy. So, a lot of people would make the argument, oh, it's body work, it's not sex work. Body work, it's an umbrella term that encompasses stuff like surrogate partnership. It includes professional cuddling, whereas sex work is more of selling a fantasy like stripping and creating porn. Okay, I see the positives to creating a distinction between professional cuddling and sex work, but I feel like I'm the only person who is very vocal about the negative sides to creating a distinction, because I say this all the time in my writing. Professional cuddling is in legal limbo because I don't think there are any laws about professional cuddling in general. And so you can't really say, oh, it's criminalized, oh, it's decriminalized, oh, it's legalized, oh, it's partially legalized, because I don't think there are laws about it in general. So we are in a legal limbo. And so we are at the mercy of whatever the people in power just feel like in the moment. And that's scary. And I mean, there's so many misconceptions about sex work. I'm currently writing my capstone paper about the four legislative models for sex work. And even like politicians who have like master's degrees and even doctorate's degrees in political science, they don't understand it. But they're passing laws that are negatively impacting millions and possibly billions of people worldwide. And it's like, I don't want to waste my breath separating myself from sex workers when there's just so many people who are going to look at me and be like, yeah, you're just some weirdo deviant. You're some like Sucia, because no moral, sane person would just meet up with strangers in their house and embrace them for like 2 hours every single week. Like, I did not know of the term Sucia until I met you. So I hope I'm using that correctly.
You used it well, yes.
So people would say something like that. Okay.
And I understand that the need for cuddling, I guess in a way, fortunately or unfortunately for me, that me having been an intercourse addict, I would seek out that need for physical touch by just seeking other women to hook up with. And even though I couldn't rationalize or couldn't verbalize the need to have physical touch, it was just, I knew I needed to feel better. And the only way I knew to do that was to go hook up with random girls. And so, in the sense, I was fortunate that I could do that for myself. Even 10 years ago, guys, or more often than not, you couldn't hear, or very rarely would you hear about cuddling or professional cuddlers. Like, it was every now and again, you would see something on Craigslist. And the joke that I remember hearing back then was, oh, yeah, it's just code for prostitution, because they'd taken off the whole casual encounters thing from Craigslist. So then it made it more difficult for the real sex workers. And it was just made up as a joke that, oh yeah, they're just using an excuse, or they're just trying to sugarcoat it or hide it or mask it or whatever. But now that I've gone through my therapy and understand better my issues, I understand that there is a need for physical touch, and a lot of guys don't have the social skills to have a girlfriend. So the next best thing would be to have a cuddler. And there's a whole, like you say, that there's just nothing really concrete to be able to protect you in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, you're more prone, or you in general, as cuddlers, are more prone to being persecuted, because there's nothing set in place to protect you in the first place. So how do you navigate that to protect yourself with your customers or your clients? How do you meet them, interact with them? What things are in place to help keep you protected?
That's a very good question because there's no like um, dictionary or glossary of terms that are relevant to the cuddle industry. I'm actually writing a book about the cuddle industry, and I am including a glossary in chapter 4 um, because when I say terms like cuddle website, cuddle agency, cuddle company, people are like, are they not all interchangeable? Like, what's the difference? And when I use the term cuddle agency, it's it's an agency. There's a manager, there's this like very, I don't want to say like tough way to get employed there, but there's this certain training process you have to go through, and you have to pay the manager to train you, and then you're then qualified as an independent contractor. And it's like the agency is one thing, and then the cuddle websites, they're just like this directory that you can send your email to. And nowadays you also have to send in your credit card info, and then they will look through your application and probably approve you in less than 24 hours. But then you're on your own. They don't like teach you how to enforce your boundaries. They If someone tries to sexually assault you, you could try to contact the website moderators, but they're not going to give a shit about you. And so when it comes to safety, there are very different measures that people in the agencies take versus the people on the regular cuddle websites take. Like when I started out just on the websites. I had no interest in joining the agencies because I'm like, fuck that. I don't want to have to pay someone to find customers for me. I'll just find the customers myself and keep all the money. And so I rarely enforced boundaries. I thought that I would be a bad business owner if I had boundaries. And so the first year I was a professional cuddler, a lot of sexual assaults happened. Like, I would not accept deposits. I would not ask people in advance, hey, can you Venmo me or Cash App me 20% or 50% of the total session cost. I would also, so yeah, I would mostly get paid in cash. And young me would also not ask for the cash until after the session was over. So if someone was sexually assaulting me, I would think to myself, I have to stay here until they're done doing whatever it is they want to do because I don't have the money yet. And I came all this way, so I might as well get the money. And that's terrible. And there have been times where I would be under the impression that I would cuddle someone for only an hour, and then they would be like, no, we're doing this for 2 hours. And I'm like I'm supposed to eat dinner at this location at this time, like, but I would just neglect myself because I'm like, I don't have much money. And as much as I don't want to last minute extend for another hour when they didn't even pay me up front, like, I felt like I had no choice. Growing up, my Asian immigrant parents didn't teach me a lot of self-respect. They only taught me shame. They don't teach you about safety or enforcing boundaries. They just teach you shame. And it sucks because when these sexual assaults would happen, I would be like, I have no one to turn to. Like, I don't have a community of professional cuddlers. The moderators of these websites are not going to care. In fact, the moderators are probably going to ban me if I try to come forward about this. And it's like the first website I signed up for, there was a forum section. So there were some forums that were like professional cuddlers only. There were some forums where it's professional cuddlers and the cuddle clients and the moderators, but I would just never participate in the forums. And looking back, I don't really regret not participating because I think very lowly about the moderators of cuddle websites. Um, I would say there were at least five very prominent cuddle websites before 2020 that were worldwide in almost every continent you can name. But then after 2020 hit, a lot of the cuddle agencies and the cuddle websites went under. So that breaks my heart because there's very few places where I could pivot if I'm like, fuck this platform. I hate the moderators. And so it's just very disheartening because the first website I signed up for, all of the moderators were cuddle clients. Not a single moderator was a professional cuddler. So that created this very unhealthy dynamic. And then the second website I signed up for, they had a moderator who was a professional cuddler. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hit a gold mine. I found a cuddle website and they have a professional cuddler as a moderator. I unfortunately had to pay to keep my account active. And I'm like, oh gosh, I hate this. I wish I could just keep all the money to myself. But I was like, you know what? And they have a professional cuddler as one of the moderators. So I guess it's worth it. And then that professional cuddler told me that they don't feel comfortable with me being on their website because I'm also a sex worker. And I used to have my own domain website. I made it on Squarespace. It looked bad. It looked very bad. But back when I had a domain website, I only spoke about professional cuddling, my podcast, and my online sex work. I did not talk about my in-person sex work whatsoever. And so when I created an account on my second cuddle website, I included my domain website in my bio. And then the moderator, who was a professional cuddler herself, messaged me and was like, hey, you have like 48 hours or something like that to remove this link from your bio because you mentioned some stuff there that's not platonic and we are strictly a platonic service. And I'm like, and this is the problem with cuddle agencies and cuddle websites. They do not like it when you plug in anything outside of their website. They don't like it when you share your email address. They don't like it when you share your phone number. They don't like it when you share your social media. And some of them are more strict than others. Like some of them will message you and be like, hey, can you remove this from your bio? Whereas others, they won't be like, hey, can you remove this? They'll just ban you and they won't even tell you why. And it's like, how are you going to expect people to stop, giving out their phone number, giving out their social media, if you don't tell them, hey, we don't want you to put this on your profile or DM people this? It's a terrible business model, but as a professional cuddler, I don't have that many platforms I can fall back on. Like cuddle websites, they now require you to send them your email address and your credit card info. So they're going to have your government name, which I understand you need to make sure that all of your professional cuddlers are at least 18. But if you're going to make the cuddle professionals all be adults, you need to age verify all of the cuddle clients because back in like 2018, back in my very, very baby immature days, I would get messages, and this was a rare occurrence, but I would get messages from 16-year-olds and they'll be like, you need to cuddle me. And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, you're not even 18. Like, you should be focusing on schoolwork. And then I would report their profile. So I'm very, very sick and tired of the double standards that many cuddle websites have, where it's like, we'll age verify the providers, but we're not going to age verify the cuddle clients. And unfortunately, cuddle agencies don't, okay, they do care about your safety to an extent, but they're a business. They're going to prioritize profit over people. And it's just so aggravating because when you look at their websites, it's like, over here, we're providing a therapeutic service, and we are so sad that there are so many lonely people in this world. We want to cure that loneliness because we are the good people. But then, like, last July, I applied to work at my very first cuddle agency. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have like a manager. I'm gonna have an official office. I'm gonna have like a business email that doesn't end in Gmail. And I'm gonna have this like scheduling software. I'm gonna be so more serious. And then I recently got terminated. And get this, I caught COVID last February, and I was terminated whilst my boss knew I was quarantining. And I don't know what the laws are where you live, but I'm pretty sure where I live, it's illegal to fire people whilst they have COVID. And I have no desire to report my boss to like an employment department, whatever. There's no HR for cuddle agencies, by the way. It's just I know I'm not the first professional cuddler to work for an agency and then lose hope in that agency, but it's also like the agency I was working for, whilst I hated how they charged me to work for them, I was like, okay, they're not charging me too much. Like, I spent at least $200 to work for them, whereas other cuddle companies, they will charge you about $1,000, maybe $2,000 just to apply. Like, no guarantee that you'll get hired. And it's like, there's no spectrum. Like, on the lower end, you have these small cuddle companies, and you pay maybe $100, maybe $200 to work for them. But then there's the other cuddle companies that are like $1,000 to $2,000. There's no like middle ground. I really don't want to work for those cuddle companies that charge you out the ass. But now that I've been terminated from my local cuddle company, it's like I'm running out of options. Like, I've been banned from a very well-known cuddle website because I gave out my phone number to clients and I put my social media in my profile. And I was like, okay, this is probably against the rules, but they're gonna tell me. Like, a moderator is gonna message me and be like, you have 48 hours to remove this. But no. And then so some cuddle websites, they do not allow you to use a VPN. You know what a VPN is, right? Okay, good. So some cuddle websites do not allow you to use a VPN. So you can't like change your location and then send it another application and be like, hey, I would like to be listed on your directory. Since now that cuddle companies or cuddle websites require you to send your credit or debit card information, I feel like the whole like waiting a while, maybe using a VPN, I don't think that can bypass their security because they got my government name in their blacklist. And so I feel like I would have to get a business bank account so I can get a new debit card with whatever business name I want. So then I could reapply to the website with the most traffic. And it's like, that's so much work. I'm not going to do that. I mean, I'll get a business bank account because it's good for like making taxes easier, but I'm not going to like, if another person comes up to me and is like, hey, I got banned from this one high traffic website for some bogus reason, what do? I'm not going to tell them you should get a employer identification number so then you can go open up a business bank account so you can get a new debit card with a name that isn't your government name so you could apply to the website that banned you and hope that they'll let you reapply. Like, I've had people DM me on Twitter and Reddit and whatnot and be like, hey, I got banned from the website that shall not be named and I'm really sad. Help me. What do? Yeah, someone on Twitter recently DM'd me like that. And I did not respond to them for maybe 4 days. I was like, and I normally don't get writer's block. But I was like, how do I comfort this person? Like, I've been in her shoes before, but I'm like, I don't think this person has as much of a reputation as me. And okay, to be a successful professional cuddler, you do not need to have like a big social media presence. You don't even need to have a social media presence at all. I think as long as you're very active on whatever website you're listed on, then you're great. You're good. And it's just with social media, I recommend professional cuddlers have that anyways. Not really to attract clientele, although I have attracted clientele on TikTok. I think social media can be a great resource for professional cuddlers. Like, on my social media, I'm mainly talking to other professional cuddlers. And if I were to use the forum section on cuddle websites, I would be afraid of the moderators surveilling me. Like, social media companies have a plethora of their own problems, but they're not going to be like, you cannot direct people to your website. You cannot direct people to this email address or phone number or any of that. When I discuss the problems within the cuddle industry, I like already know what the responses are going to be. The responses are going to be like, well, why don't you stop doing it? Or why don't you just create your own website? Or why don't you just like find a really rich man and settle down with him? And it's like, it's so irritating to hear these responses all the time. I know this is such a first world problem, but I'm like constantly interacting with other professional cuddlers on social media whenever possible, but I rarely have other providers publicly interact with me. Like, maybe they'll vote on a poll I'll put on Instagram, but they're not going to comment on something I tweeted out. And it sucks because like I'll be saying something on social media like, this job is so lonely. Like, there are very, very, very few people who understand what I go through. Like, I'm so used to being the first professional cuddler that people have met. Like, I am going to be interviewed for a different podcast tomorrow, and I haven't listened to any of the episodes from that person, but I was scrolling through the episode names and I saw that this podcast host has interviewed a different professional cuddler, and I'm like, this is mind-blowing. I am so used to being the first professional cuddler that people just know exists. So it's such a lonely job. And when people say stuff like, well, how can you be lonely? You cuddle people for a living. It's so dismissive. Like, do you say this to every person who works a very niche job? Because it's like, when I try to talk about safety to other people, it's like there's some parts of safety that people feel comfortable talking about. Like, when I talk about cybersecurity, like VPNs and EXIF data and all that cool techie stuff, people feel very comfortable responding to those posts. But when I talk about like physical violence, sexual assault, all this other, like, other parts of safety, like, no one ever responds to that. And I'm like, there are so many people who are telling me they're very passionate about safety and helping others learn about safety. But I'm like, are you really? Because it seems like you just want to reiterate how like fluent you are in tech jargon. But when someone is like, yeah, I fear being murdered, they just go silent. And I'm like, this is partly why my job is so lonely. And so when people say stuff like, well, why don't you just quit? I'm like, we were all born into a capitalist world. And I don't come from generational wealth. I can't just quit. I started doing this job because I was broke. And because of this job, I can afford so many things that 19-year-old me would not have imagined 24-year-old me being able to afford. Like, I can afford to buy plane tickets. I can afford to make hotel reservations. And not like cheap ass Spirit Airlines or like Motel 6. I can afford the nicer things in life. I can't afford to live on my own, even though I would love to experience solo living at one point, but I can at the very least afford to buy myself food. And when I was 19, I would just go to whatever restaurants that accepted student ID, and a filling meal would be less than $10. I mean, those are very, very hard to come by nowadays. I would say the average meal in the Bay Area now is $20. I mean, some restaurants will give you large portions so you can save for later, which is nice. But yeah, if 19-year-old me did not start professional cuddling, she definitely would not be able to afford $20 lunches today. And if 19-year-old me did not start professional cuddling, I would not have money to set aside for investing. I was able to open up a retirement account when I was 21. I'm assuming that most 21-year-olds in the United States don't have a retirement account or even know how to just know the difference. So I've worked very exploitative jobs. Like, I've worked at cafeterias, I've worked in retail, I've worked in the wedding industry, and I mean, I've worked childcare jobs, but I loved those jobs. I've worked such exploitative jobs before, and when people ask me questions like, well, why did you start doing sex work? I'll start telling them about the minimum wage jobs I worked. And sometimes they're like, okay, I get it. But other times they're like, I still think you shouldn't have started sex work. I'm like, excuse you? Like, at my cafeteria job, they refused to give me my, I think it's called a W-2 or W-4, the IRS paper that you sign so that you can get paychecks. They refused to give me my IRS papers before I started working so they could get away with not giving me paychecks. And so then after a month of just working for free, I was like, I'm going to stop. Like, I can't keep working without pay. Honestly, I should have stopped like less than a week of free labor. But 18-year-old me did not understand boundaries. And I thought that me quitting would have a ripple effect. Like, no business would hire me after this for quitting a job so shortly after being hired, even though I technically was not getting paid to. Yeah, I could go like that's a story for another day, but just know that I have worked very exploitative minimum wage jobs and I was like, fuck it. Fuck it. Like I'm not like when I started professional cuddling, I was charging only $65 an hour when at the time $80 an hour was the norm. But even then I was like, I am racking in dough, like I am rich. Like, oh my gosh, instead of doing a month of cafeteria labor for $200, I am making $200 in only a week. And um, then I eventually raised my rates to 80, and then I raised my rates to 100, and now I charge $130 an hour for cuddling, which I would say is above the average rate in the United States. But yeah, I've had pretty and there's so much duality to people. That is something I learned a lot in my profession. Like I really like the side people show me when I cuddle them is a side that I think they want to show, but they're too scared to show other people. And part of people expressing their authentic self to me is expressing their duality. Like I've had people who are like, I really like you and I want you to have security. So honestly, I am willing to like the word is sublease, but I don't come to me for that kind of information. I don't really know much about renting, but I've had people be like, I would sublease a room in my apartment for you because I care so much about you being able to live on your own without your parents and you you would have so much security. And then in the same breath that they would be like, you should be charging way higher than what you're currently charging. And then I would be like, thank you, cuddle client. Are you going to pay me more than what I'm currently charging? And they'll be like, nope. And I'm like, you don't care about my like long-term satisfaction. You don't even care about my short-term satisfaction. The duality of man. Yeah, like I once in a blue moon I'll rave about a wonderful experience I had with a cuddle client on social media, but some of my best experiences with cuddle clients, I've also experienced some of my worst memories with the exact same people. But you know, when I'm talking on social media, I'm not like giving out names. I try not to be too descriptive. So I don't think anyone knows except for me that I can have the absolute best experiences and absolute worst experiences with the same people. I've had cuddle clients whom the first time we met, it was horrible. Like everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong, but then gradually over time, like our cuddle sessions would just get better and better. And then there are other people where the first time we met, we really hit it off, and then every succeeding session it would just get worse. Like I don't think humans are one dimensional. We are very complex, and especially as a professional cuddler, you're going to see the complexities of people. And I try really hard not to generalize people. And part of like that's a good trait to have, but part of that also means, you know, after a certain amount of time, after someone hurts me, my brain just starts idealizing them and tries to make excuses for why they hurt me, and that's not a good thing. Like as a professional cuddler, I try to be as understanding and open-minded as I possibly can, but I got to have some beliefs that I'm firm in. I got to have some core foundational things to me. and in my writing, I it's funny how a lot of professional cuddlers are like, we're not sex workers. We don't sell a fantasy. We sell the real thing. And it's like funny because a lot of the sex workers I know, they sell fantasies, but they'll also be very frank about, they'll just be very, very frank. And you could argue that they break character. And I don't really. Okay, there are some professional cuddlers with really frank blogs. They'll be like, no sugarcoating. This is my blog. This is the reality of my job. And then there are some people who run blogs where you can, or at least for me, I can just tell that every single blog is marketing. And like I market too. I would love, like I talk about this on my Patreon. Like I would love to have clients in, Denver, in Jacksonville, in like Washington D.C. I would love to have them fly me out to where they live and then cuddle them there, because so far I've only cuddled people in California, and I just really want to tour the United States. And I get so excited when I find out that other people like me are also writers, and I hastily go to their blog and I'm like, oh, what are they writing about? And, sometimes a professional cuddler will just write about their mundane everyday life, like nothing to do with their job. And I'm like, okay, I'm not that interested in you saying hi to your doorman every single morning and then going on a walk around your block. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. And then there are other people where their blog is like clearly just all marketing, like, I was looking at these photos of cherry blossoms near the Lincoln Memorial. It would be so nice if an admirer from far away fly me out to Washington, D.C., and then we can cuddle and have a great time and watch the sunset over, I don't know, all the monuments of Washington, D.C., but I know there's a lot of monuments. And it's like, I need, for my own sanity, I need to read writing from similar people that is frank. It's not like advertising to clients. It's not like, I baked a pie today. I smiled when I pulled it out of the oven. Like, I write what I want to read, and I take a lot of concepts that I find out through sex work and I apply it to the cuddle industry. Like, I found out about the Madonna whore complex and Linda syndrome through other sex workers. For those who don't know, I actually have my articles pulled up right now. So, Madonna whore complex uh, has nothing to do with a pop star. Um, in this context, uh, the Madonna refers to depictions of the ideal woman, aka the Virgin Mary. And different cultures have different ideals of what women should ascribe to, but they always create a good versus bad woman dichotomy. And so, Sucias, they're the bad girls. I mean, they're the bad girls that everyone secretly wants, but like, the Madonna whore complex really plagues the adult industry. Like, when women come into the strip club, I think they are so disrespectful towards the strippers because they're like, well, I want men to view me as like the good woman. So I'm going to go above and beyond to disrespect the strippers so that men can tell, oh yeah, this is not a Sucia. This is a good woman. And maybe there are some dissertations out there about how women oppress sex workers. But yeah, a lot of sex workers are in academia, not just me. And so um, I wrote an article in January on Substack called Cuddling and the Madonna Whore Complex. I'm so proud of that. It took me, I think, a month to write, and after that, I was, like, so burnt out from writing. I'm like, I from November to January, I was on a roll. I would write articles that are maybe 9 minutes long if you were to read them out loud, and now I'm like, I'm not writing anything longer than 4 minutes if you were to read it out loud, because I do research for these articles. I don't just pull things from my ass. Like, I have a bibliography at the end of every article, and it's not just me plugging in myself, even though I do want people to subscribe to my Patreon. Um, like, I do back up what I say, because as Sucia, people are going to take me less seriously. People are going to be like, how do I know you didn't just invent this concept called the Madonna Whore Complex? I'm like, okay, well, here's a source that I'm pretty sure is reputable, so you can check my bibliography. And so I'll synopsize my Madonna Whore Complex article. I say that whoredom is peculiar because a good girl can very easily go bad, but once you're labeled a whore, or in this case a sucia, then it's practically impossible to go back to that good image. And that sucks because we're all like pressured to be good. But it's so hard to be viewed as good if you're a woman after like one thing gets out that may make you look just a teensy bit sucia. And people who believe in the Madonna whore complex don't understand that women can have boundaries. Like, they don't think that respect should be given. They think it should be earned. And on top of that, they're like, if I lose respect for you, you'll never gain it back. And that's unfair. And it's the same thing with the cuddle websites. They're like, you violate one of our terms and conditions once, we're going to ban your IP address. And fuck that. I'm not going to buy a brand new cell phone or a brand new laptop just so I could reapply to a website that has my government name on file. Like, y'all need to fix your shit. I'm not going to do it. I mean, they can pay me for consultation, but I highly doubt they're going to ever do that, even though it would greatly benefit them to do so. And the same thing applies to the cuddle agency, where I received an email whilst I was sick with COVID, and they're like, I'm not going to tell you why I'm terminating you, even though you've been a very dedicated worker for me for the past 8 months. I'm just going to tell you that my decision is final. Good luck. I hope there's some like employment lawyer or something, or someone who is listening to this and can attest, like, yeah, that shit is illegal. I'm not going to file a lawsuit, but I hope there's a lawyer or attorney listening to this who can confirm my suspicions. So so moving on to the Linda syndrome. When I discuss the problems within the cuddle industry, I do think I have this voice in the back of my mind saying, well, by vocalizing all of this, aren't you like giving ammo to the people who might have a vendetta against what you do? I I know you should not read the YouTube comments or the Reddit comments for anything, but I do read them. And so I have read very nasty things from people who are super ignorant about my job, but they feel emboldened to speak their knee-jerk reactions. So I don't think I am giving ammo to the people who are against my job when I speak about the problems within the industry. Every industry has its problems. There is no industry that is completely perfect, and people should be allowed to complain about their jobs without fear that their job is just going to be eradicated. And so I wrote an article in, what was it, February? Yeah, February of 2023, titled, Will Cuddle Providers Develop Linda Syndrome? And before I started researching for that article, I vaguely knew of the concept. I knew that Linda syndrome referred to porn stars who retire, and during their retirement, they become vehemently anti porn. And I wrote this article because, TLDR, because I do worry that I will live to see the day where professional cuddlers leave the industry, but after they retire, they become like anti pro cuddling mouthpieces. Like we're seeing this with the adult industry. I'm assuming that the cuddle industry is going to become bigger in the future, and the bigger the industry is going to get, the more people that are going to have bad experiences, and the more people who have bad experiences, more people are going to retire and just despise the industry. So I decided to research the person that the term Linda syndrome is named after. And so it's named after someone named Linda Lovelace, who was really big in the 1970s. And so she started doing sex work. She started doing sex work out of necessity. Like she had a really rough childhood, and I would argue abusive parents. And so her story is like a lot of other sex workers. You started out of necessity, not because you thought it was glamorous, but because you were raised by a family that really doesn't support you. And so you are all you can depend on. And throughout writing this article, I just became very, very pitiful for the person that Linda syndrome is named after. I initially thought I would just be roasting this person throughout the entire article once it was finished. But afterwards, I was like, man, I feel really bad for this person. She's gone through so much shit. And okay, so I think she was doing porn in the 70s, and around the 80s or maybe the 90s, she became like I think in the 80s, she became a very well-known anti-porn spokesperson. And so, Republicans in the US at the time loved her. And they were like, look at this figure. She is proof that professional porn, and honestly sex work in general, is awful. We have someone who was in the adult industry who agrees with us, and it's like we're seeing the same thing today, but nowadays it's like grifters. Nowadays it's grifters like fucking like Nicholas Kristoff and Layla McCoy, who advocate for just getting rid of Pornhub and all that. One of my professors told me, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I'm like, that is so poignant. Oh my gosh. I see that in so many facets of society today. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I'm afraid that's going to happen to the cuddle industry. So I'm going to pull up my article. Okay. I'm concerned about professional cuddlers lacking class analysis. Every valid criticism of the cuddle industry can be traced back to capitalism. Sex workers have had this argument ad nauseum. Like, we are beating this conversation topic to death, and I'm so exhausted. Like, every season, we're rehashing this, and like I can understand why we're rehashing this, because this kind of education should be readily available. It should be easily accessible. And so that's why I'm putting it on Substack. So in case like my social media goes down or Patreon goes down, like ideally this would still exist so people can still have access. I worry about conservative ideals becoming the norm of the cuddle industry. Conservatives love capitalism and promote following every rule without hesitation. Law and order is lauded as the pinnacle of goodness. It's not. Rules and laws are unfair a majority of the time. And then I give several examples about rules in the cuddle industry being absolutely abhorrent. And so I say that those are all reasons to hate the status quo. Those are not reasons to quit professional cuddling and spread like anti-cuddle industry propaganda. Professional cuddlers are stronger united than divided. Websites and agencies will only treat us better if we demand they treat us better. Linda Lovelace's first husband was violent, and he was also her manager, which is that's so gross when people in power try to date their subordinates. I believe it's inherently wrong. And so it's disturbing to me that when news reports about her abusive marriage just acquiesce with the violence. They're like, ooh, look at this like shiny, sparkly former porn star. Oh my gosh, look at her nudes that were taken in the 1970s. And then it's like, oh yeah, her husband's abusive. And it's like, let's go back to all the celebrities that tried to hook up with her in the 70s. And it's like, oh my God, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Like nowadays, I do think that people are better when it comes to discussing domestic violence. But we have to do more than just talk about it. We have to create material change. Like I'm glad that people are being given the vocabulary, but domestic violence is still a problem. I unfortunately have been in numerous abusive relationships since I became a professional cuddler, and I'm so fortunate to be in a happy relationship right now. So I have written many articles on Substack and Medium where I discuss the harassment that I've received. And like, I've tried talking to journalists at, major news stations about my job, but I only have negative things to report. I mean, I love talking to podcast hosts like yourself because you don't have like a boss breathing down your neck at New York Times, and you're not pressured to push a certain agenda that major news you're well aware of how news stations produce propaganda. Like, meanwhile, small-time YouTubers and podcast hosts like yourself, you don't pressure me to talk about this subject and totally neglect this very important, relevant part about my job. Whereas I need to do an expose on this soon. There's this one journalist who spoke to me on the phone a while back, and she was like, I want to write an article about you. And I'm like, great. And then she's like, but we're only going to focus on your clients. We're not actually going to focus on yourself. And I'm like, okay. And then she's like, and on top of that, I want you to only focus on your Silicon Valley tech bro clientele. And, that is a huge part of my clientele. But I'm like, it's so strange how you come to me and you're like, I need to write an article about professional cuddling. So that's why I'm coming to you. But also, don't talk about yourself and don't talk about your clients who aren't Silicon Valley specific people. Yeah, I don't think if that article ever gets published that she'll alert me that it was published. And even if she tells me, oh yeah, I published that article, I'm pretty sure it's going to be paywalled. Oh, I hate with every fiber of my being the news websites that are like, you need to pay us to give you news. News should be free. It doesn't matter if it's radio, it doesn't matter if it's internet, it doesn't matter if it's television. I think news should be free, and that should not be a radical belief. People should know what's going on with the world, regardless of who they are. And it's also a shitty business model. Like, so many news websites are free, like paywalling your shit, it's not a good business thing to do. And thank you so much for having your podcast, because if podcasts did not exist, if they weren't the juggernaut they are today, then I would be stuck only getting the word out through, I don't know, a Blogspot blog, if you remember that, and maybe talking to news stations and corporations. That would be awful. So thank you for having your podcast, and I'll go back to Linda syndrome because I went on a soapbox. I do feel like I'm a second-class citizen because of what I do for a living. And, like, I tried applying for apartments in January of this year because, like I said earlier, I want to experience living on my own at least once in my life. And where I live, rent is very expensive. $1,800 a month for rent alone is considered cheap. And pretty much everyone is like, you need to make 3 times your rent. And yes, there are many people with only one job who can afford that, but in the San Francisco Bay Area, so many people have at least 5 jobs just so they can make their rent. And when I was applying for apartments, the apartment people were like, show us your pay stubs so you can prove you make 3 times our rent. And I'm like, you motherfuckers. I also got a car in January of this year, and they said the same thing, like, what is your job? And I'm like, thankfully at the car dealership, my family was there with me for support. If I was there alone, I don't know if I would have survived. I was at the car dealership for 10 hours. 10 hours, yeah. From 1 p.m. to 11 p.m. Didn't get the apartment. Thankfully, I got the car. But I don't I I've yet to hear a story about a professional cuddler losing their car because the car company found out what they do for a living, but there are definitely professional cuddlers who are discriminated by landlords. And this is something I learned in 2018 or 2019, very early on in my cuddle career. Um, and it creates this dependency on other people. And I think interdependence and, community care is important. But I I love living with my boyfriend, I really do, but it sucks how if I was single, I like living on my own would not be an option. I would have to be one of those like stereotypical young people in San Francisco who has like 7 different roommates and we all share one bathroom. And I've discussed how lonely it feels to be in my industry because it's such an esoteric job. But even when I look at the established professional cuddlers, like a lot of them are college educated. They own a home. They've owned a car for like over 10 years. Some of them have their own kids. Like they're when they started out, they were so much more privileged than me. And the face of professional cuddling is very white. It's so white. And it's like even okay, there used to be a cuddle agency in Hawaii called Aloha Cuddle Company, and it was started by I'm pretty sure a white person. If I'm getting this wrong, please call me out. But it was an agency called Aloha Cuddle Company, and it was started by a white person. And I, it's now defunct. I don't know if they ever had any Pacific Islander people in their roster. But it's just like so I'm Chinese Vietnamese. I speak Cantonese. I speak Mandarin. But if someone like if like a white person in China started their own cuddle company and it was like Ni Hao Cuddle Company and they don't even have like a single or not white Chinese person on their roster, it's like shit man, I was so looking forward to having like people of color representation in this already lonely industry. But it's oh my god. Um where was I going? I went on another tangent. Um, but I love
I love your train of thought, just how you flow through.
yeah, this is how my cuddle sessions sound.
And but it is amazing that you're captivating and engrossing too, because
Aw,
there's lulls, but at the same time, I know that there's something else coming, so I'll just let
aw,
you
thank you.
keep going with it. And there's like so many things I meant to like write notes because like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Oh, that's a good point. But I can empathize with you on a lot of similar things. One being a person of color, but with your industry and being kind of like ostracized in society for what you do and just existing in essence. I've lost out on very well paying and jobs that would relocate me just because they found out about my podcast. So even though I talk about, sex, I'm not like having porn, I don't have any nudity. I just talk about sex, about mental health, about relationships and dating. I've gotten we appreciate, and I'm talking, gone through like 3 to 7 rounds of interviews. And, at the end of the interview, they're like, okay, this is great. I can't wait to have you. The next person you're going to talk to was just a formality. We're going to get you on board. You're in. And then I get the email, um, after careful review, blah, 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 your background doesn't coincide with our company, whatever, our not motto, not mantra, but essentially that hinting that there's something in my background that doesn't coincide with how they run their company. So I was like, maybe I should like not use my legal name or change things around, but whatever.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. I hate interviews that are just for formality. This is why I'm a professional cuddler. But yeah, I have ever since I was 18, I've wanted to become a high school teacher, but and so many teachers have been fired for doing sex work on the side, and it's like It's not like they're molesting the children. Come on. And so a part of me is like, maybe I should just become a college professor. I mean, at least I wouldn't be teaching children so people can't be like, "Oh, you're grooming children," but there's always going to be that risk. I hate it. But I'll wrap up my Linda Lovelace thingamabobber. So yeah, Linda Lovelace, she used to partner with, hold on. So in the 1980s, there was this one organization called WAP, Women Against Pornography. I know. I think Cardi B was well aware what WAP used to stand for. So, anyways, in the 1980s, there was this one New York City organization called Women Against Pornography. And there were some prominent sex worker activists who met up with them to talk to them about why they did sex work. They're still doing sex work. Like Carol Lee, who is a badass and sadly recently passed, was a sex worker activist many decades ago, and she met up with WAP. Linda Lovelace, also former sex worker, met up with WAP, but it was because she, at the time, supported their mission. And then she eventually realized that they didn't view her as human. They were very Madonna whore complex. They're like, once a whore, always a whore. But if you want to help us push our agenda, we'll keep milking the cow until there's no more milk left. And so she was like, fuck y'all. I'm leaving y'all. And so in the 90s, she actually, I would say she found peace with her past. Like, she did this one interview with Entertainment Tonight. She didn't show her face, but she was like, yeah, I don't want to use my porn name anymore when I'm interviewed, but I just want to let the world know that I'm very happy with where I'm at right now. And oh, sorry, my computer is about to die. I'll wrap this up. Like, I'm so glad that she found peace. It really sounded like she found peace, and I hope all the sex workers and the professional cuddlers and everyone else listening to this, if you're going through some shit, I hope you soon find peace. And I know very few of us surpass the 2-month mark in the cuddle industry due to burnout or like shitty moderators or something, but unfortunately, after 5 years and counting of doing this, my life is not perfect. It's vastly better than it used to be, but there's still a lot of difficult stuff in my life. And I know that decriminalizing sex work is not going to just make my life perfect. It's still a step in the right direction. And I don't want anyone to think, well, why should I support this if it's not going to make my life perfect? Like, panaceas do not exist. There's no like magical piece of legislation or magical pill or whatever that's just going to eradicate all your problems. And I know it's so discouraging because it's like, why is justice so slow? But, you know, justice that is slow is better than no justice at all, or what's the word? Like reverting back to times when it was even worse. I feel hypocritical for saying that because I'm such an impatient person. Like, I want justice now, but yeah, I just had to get this out there before my computer dies because at the end of the day, I just want decriminalization of sex work. It's gonna make sex workers' lives better, which will indirectly make professional cuddlers' lives better, and also for the clients, it's gonna make their lives better. That's pretty much all I have to say. Don't come to us and be like, I'm going to be your savior. I'm gonna like save you from this awful job. Don't be like, well, maybe you should be learning self-defense if you're so scared. Yeah, I've had randos just recommend me books on how the FBI trains their workers in self-defense when I've complained about my fears of going to strangers' houses, and it's so unhelpful. And I cannot reiterate enough. I'm very, very grateful that you gave me this platform to speak, because I so frequently, when I talk to podcast hosts, they're like, I have no idea what this is. You need to give me the like 101. You need to give me the entry level class. And so I don't get around to talking about the problems, because people are like, so what is a typical cuddle session like? And the answer is, we cuddle and we talk. And they'll really grill me and be like, what does a good client do? And I'm like, they respect me and they pay me. And like, I'm not going to talk for hours about that. I'm just not. I don't wanna. And there are other topics that I could talk for days about. And the podcast hosts, they're not going to ask me those questions. I can't blame them, because they don't know anything about my industry. But I'm really grateful for people like you who are like, just go off. Just, you can rattle on about your podcast. You can rattle on about a shitty experience you had recently. You can like, thank you for giving me creative freedom.
Not a problem. I try to not pride myself, but I do like to be a podcast that's different in the sense that instead of asking the normal or typical questions, or even I like to just open with one, okay, a 101 real quick, but then get into like the meat of it, of what it's really like to be you versus the cookie cutter type thing that everybody kind of goes through. Because, and that's why I asked you, like when we were emailing back and forth, and she's gone. Well, unfortunately, Felicity's battery died, but you will be able to find her in the show notes. I have a whole list of things on how to find her, but just make sure you pay attention to the show notes. I'll have all her links and stuff there. Her Substack is a great and phenomenal way to find out more about the cuddle industry. Thanks for listening. I love you. You are worthy of it. Till next time, besos.